You want a story time? Let's talk about it. It has been a long time since I've talked about my sister's story in full and my story in full. So essentially, to make a very, very long story somewhat short, my sister went missing in 2001. She was 17 and I was 12. At that time, I thought that she just ran away, that she was rebellious, didn't want to live under our dad's rules anymore, and left and never came back. I was devastated. I made her first flyer when I was 12, and nobody looked for her, not anybody in my family. The police didn't do anything, despite her being reported missing. Nothing really happened until about 2006, and that's when an inmate confessed to unaliving her. This was a false confession. He has since recanted several times. And what this did, though, was make the police finally look into my sister's case. Why is the 17-year-old missing? What's going on there? And they pretty quickly realized that it was our father who most likely was the reason Alissa was gone. So they came in and they raided our home and ended up finding domestic tea items that I can't really say here on TikTok. If you look it up, you'll see that that was his first arrest in 2008. He ends up getting about 10 years in prison for that. Now, I was just starting college and still living at home and very much brainwashed by our father. You know, my entire life, I was isolated from adults. I wasn't made to go to school. I was able to do whatever I wanted, and I thought my dad was the best guy ever. He is ex-law enforcement. He has this tragic backstory that I completely misunderstood as a kid. So by the time he goes to prison when I'm in college, I think my dad's innocent. I think I need to help him. I don't think ever he could be connected to Alissa going missing. But it turns out, of course, he was. Over the years, my eyes really open. I get more evidence. I understand fully what's going on now that I'm an adult and not a small child that he can manipulate. And essentially, I go to the police and say, I see what you see. I do think my father's responsible. What can I do to help? And they say, well, no problem. When he gets out for his domestic charges, we're going to arrest him for your sister's case. That way he can't combine sentences. But that doesn't end up happening. He gets out. There's no arrest. I go back to the police and ask what happened. And they say, well, you know, we can't do it now. We think that you should get media coverage. And so that's what I do. I go from working with kids in foster care and having an Instagram with like 2 pictures of my dogs to suddenly throwing myself at the public, begging for help. I do a variety of different social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all your normal ones. And eventually I start going on podcasts. You know, the major news, the major media was not interested in my sister's case at all. I couldn't get anybody to talk about it. But I could get independent content creators to do it. So YouTube, podcasters, I go on, I don't know, a few dozen, before I'm highly encouraged by my creator friends to create my own content. So I start a podcast called Voices for Justice, and I request my sister's case file, which I'd never done before. I just assumed like this information was known and out there. I don't know why. You guys, I'm not in this world. I just live true crime. I didn't do it professionally at this point. So I eventually get her case records and I'm like, oh my gosh, no one has ever read this case file before. No one has ever reported on her case in full before. So that's what I do. I go through the records, I create this podcast, and I tell her story in excruciating detail. I go back to the 1970s when my dad's a cop. I analyze what he did there, all the way through him adopting my sister and everything in between. It's insane. But eventually after that, you know, I'm making these episodes, and then in March 2020, I find this app called TikTok, and I join it. And I start making videos about her, and I go super viral. And when I start posting home videos about, you know, our experiences and my father watching her, I go even more viral. And really, the entire truth of what happened to my sister comes together. You know, she wasn't a rebellious teenager. She was horribly mistreated in our household for her entire life. I just start crying for people to help, literally crying, unfortunately, a lot of the time on this app. I'm begging, I'm crying, I'm asking for help. I raise money for a billboard. I create this podcast. I dedicate my entire life to getting justice for my sister Alissa. And in August 2020, they finally make the arrest. The county attorney thanks me publicly. It's really cool. It's this, crazy experience that is bittersweet because it's hard to see my dad arrested for that. But it's also fantastic to see my sister get some form of justice. Now, unfortunately, we go to court in July 2023, and in a very, very rare ruling, the judge grants the defense's request for an acquittal, saying that the state has not presented their case. And unfortunately, the state did do an extremely poor job at presenting her case. And I mean, the night before the trial started, during the trial, they were asking me, and I've just come to find out, asking some of Alyssa's friends very rudimentary questions, like which brother is which child has which parents, just things they should have known if they were actually studying this case for 3 years in preparation for this trial, which they clearly were not. So the prosecution does a terrible job. And the defense gets this very rare acquittal granted, and my father is a free man. So after a lifelong, and my dad's, what is he now? In his late 70s, he's almost 80. He spent his entire life terrorizing specifically women, and I'll just leave it at that. He's now a free man. And I'm telling you, his victims were coming forward until right before the trial. A brand new victim right before the trial. So he's now free. And I'm left in this position where I'm trying to find Alyssa's remains. They've never been found. They've never been looked for. The police will not work with me, but they say that I need police cooperation for it to hold up in court. So I'm in a really weird spot with her case right now. And I'm trying to do some things in the background that I don't want to tell the public because I know that my dad's watching. Hi, Dad. I hate that he watches. I hate that you watch. But that's where I'm at, is I'm trying to figure it out. And it's a very sad, tragic story that I have unfortunately dedicated basically my entire life to at this point. And I have some options. I'm figuring it out. I'm going to finish telling Alyssa's story in podcast format. And I'm just going to keep trying to get justice for her. While we can't get those same charges, second degree, he can be charged with other charges, so it's not over yet. It's just re-strategizing, pivoting, and figuring out what's next.